Good afternoon and good evening. I'm Eric Shiraev. We study international politics, and today we turn to environmental issues. We know that environmental problems, environmental solutions, well, we call it environmental issues. We describe problems, solutions, policies, but this is a huge subject. And how do we study and why do we study this in international relations class? Well, because we discuss global issues, we discuss local issues, and environment is our life. And the policies that sovereign countries have about this very precious issue is important to study. Not only is it important to study, it's important to understand them well and use them in your future. Many of you, within few years, will become quite important decision makers, locally, nationally, and globally. And so with your knowledge and skills and your passion and scientific background, well, you will be making those important decisions about not only the future of our planet, but the distant future, but also about today. I will explain a few important things because the discussions, the details will be taken care of in your classes, in your class. And right now I will explain the most important definitions. We'll identify biggest problems. We'll tell you about the solutions that's offered in political science, international relations, theories about how to approach those problems. And some debates about what's most important for us, what is our top priority, but most importantly, how we achieve those goals. We all know that we have problems, but the question is how can we achieve and how should we achieve those goals? And that's my lecture is all about. Only important points, only key points, only maybe, well, some general points. All the details will be discussed in class. Let me share the screen and start this journey, this lecture in the area of environmental issues. Well, one of my favorite examples is the one that's you probably checked out in the textbook. The question is, do your hairspray in the refrigerator have anything to do with international politics? The question may appear silly, but it's quite important, and it used to be. It's a very important question, which in fact was related to international politics. Yes, back in the 60s and 70s, scientists began to notice that something was going on with the thinning ozone layer in our atmosphere. At the same time, doctors kept noticing that all over the world, the cases of cancer, especially skin cancer, were increasing. And the connection was made. Well, most of our scientists were convinced that there was a connection. Even those who were not convinced believed that, well, there could be a connection. And a connection associated with the thinning of ozone layer and with the spread of propellants. That's hairspray and the refrigerators then contained. 1960s, 1970s was the time when so many people on Earth began to use those hairsprays. Fashion industry was booming that time. Middle class was expanding, and people were using this, men and women, to take care of their hair. This was massive release of those chemicals in the atmosphere. And the refrigerators, the same thing. Boom. Wealthy countries began to produce those refrigerators, 30s and 40s and 50s, but more and more people were able to buy them in the 60s and the 70s. And then the result, something had to be done. And in the midst of a Cold War, can you imagine, the countries would disagree on everything, the Soviet Union and its followers, and the West and the countries associated with that. And yet they were able to sit down, to think, and make the decision. 1985, the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer, 20 countries signed it. In a bigger one, 1987, Montreal Protocol, 43 countries. They agreed to phase out those chemical plants that were responsible for production of those propellants, and well, invest in industries to develop cleaner products. The results, of course, are not necessarily perfect, But at least something was done, and at least the consensus today, you can check the sites and the opinions that the problem somehow was not resolved completely, but at least it was taken care of. But I'm not here to argue about the chemical and physical and atmospheric context of this process. We discuss about the action of countries. Countries were able to put aside their local interests, their national interests, and to move to global interest. And understanding that global interest is their national interest, is their local interest too. And they were able to achieve this form of collective action. And that is, in my opinion, it's a very encouraging example. And we know that how difficult certain agreements come to fruition. We know how difficult it is to negotiate the issue. Every country wants to bring something on the table and says, no, this agreement will harm us. How about them? How about them? But that agreement on ozone layer was an example of how things were done. They were political, they were cultural, they were economic, and many other obstacles here. And yet countries were able to agree on this fundamental issue. Environmental challenges are plentiful, we know this, and they are together will fall into two huge categories. Essentially, yes, think about this. Either it's contamination, so it's so many byproducts of human, non-human activities accumulating there and affecting the surroundings, including our air and water and soil. So contamination, too much of something, and this something is not necessarily well helping. It's harmful for everyone. And depletion, it's serious reduction in amount or changes in the quality of various elements of ecosystem, including resources and species. So essentially, just basically either contamination or depletion. And then square, this is a box here on the bottom of the slide, shows just a short list of problems which are lingering and which are there. So, well, example of depletion, it's a heartbreaking example of disappearing or disappeared sea. Just the map is Eurasia. It's like a blue dot here is the Aral Sea, and you can say Aral Sea. The different emphasis could be here, but Aral I think is more appropriate. Aral Sea, and it's in the middle of Eurasia, right there, just in territory between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and used to be a sea, or let's say lake, a huge one with salt water. Today, essentially, you can walk it across. What happened there? It's a massive project was launched in 1960s by the Soviet Union, and the goal was great. The goal was to bring water to farmers in Uzbekistan and in adjacent regions. And Uzbekistan was a part of the Soviet Union at that time. And the idea was to give them water, to give them irrigation projects, and so they can grow vegetables, fruit, and most likely, well, cotton to compete with Pakistani industries and others, and make farmers wealthy and make them prosperous. And the great idea, right? They bring them water, just excellent. But the scientists, they either lied to the government or they were forced to lie, saying that's a product of their work, the project of diverting the water of rivers into canals and reducing the flow of water in the Aral Sea. Well, the projects will not be harmful to environments, and they were harmful. And decision was made anyway, just under pressure of a communist government, to make it happen. Canals were dug out, water was diverted, and then it dried out. So did the sea. So it's basically just today it's empty place. Thousands of people had to move out because fishery industry is destroyed. People can live there because of the salt storms there, and it's dangerous for their lungs. It's an ecological disaster. But the problem is that very few concerned about this. A, because countries didn't find anything important there. Yes, some traces of oil and maybe some interest of this part, but essentially both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, they lost interest in this former sea. Certain areas of the sea had been somehow restored a little bit, just on pockets and small lakes. And I heard that some fishery industry has been partially restored in the north by Kazakhstan, but essentially it's a Dead Sea. It's the ultimate example of depletion. Contamination, we know no. This is one of those projections by the UN, the World Resources Institute. It's a global organization. UN uses almost the same data, suggesting that, well, only just greenhouse emissions, but this is what can be projected by year 2025. Many things have been done already, and maybe those numbers will not be that intimidating when we actually reach year 2025. But well, I don't think there will be much different from this prediction. In other words, just to repeat, the contamination and depletion, two biggest problems that we face. Policies in general, over centuries, governments developed several kinds of policies, and three of them, restriction and regulation. So basically you limit production, you limit the exchange, you limit consumption in certain ways. Second, environmental investments. You promote something which is healthier, which is not that destructive. And of course, something in between, comprehensive policies. Examples of restrictions, a famous 1900 Lacey Act in the United States, which banned trade, international trade in wildlife, fish, and plants that have been illegally obtained, transported, or sold. And so this act effective today, and the last amendment was made in 2008, maybe some later, but I think it's the most important, which prohibited import of illegal timber to the United States. And it was massive, massive movement of illegal timber to this country, massive. And I'm not just saying that everything was solved by this law, it's American law, but there were those who cut this timber illegally, those who sell it, and if it's impossible to move to the United States, there'll be another buyer, you know? So that's why we need to have collective action about this. Right? If one country bans, another one bans, third bans, that's it. Yeah, there'll be 100 other countries in which companies and even governments would buy this illegally obtained timber. So, give an example, but this is at least an example of restriction. Well, same category example about the Amazon River basin and regulations are quite, I wouldn't say stiff and tough, but owners must keep 80% of the land forested, the other restrictions right there. So it's an example of conservation. So policies that aim to protect and preserve natural resources, species and plants, and their habitat. And green investments, I see this is quite obvious. I know many of you fly and will be flying in the future, and there's certain areas in the world that's quite fascinating. And in my humble opinion, it's that when you fly to Denmark, and usually planes approach from the side of Sweden there, you fly from north to south, and you reach the see the shore of Europe. You see Denmark, and see the entire shore is covered with those devices that produce electricity and using wind power. So like giants with giant hands. It's a part of landscape there. Not only, of course, in Denmark, you can see these things almost everywhere in the world, including the United States, of course, but the massive presence of them is in Denmark. In fact, Denmark is one of the countries that is actively substituted energy sources by wind. Winds are quite strong there, and Denmark faces the sea. It's easier for them than some other places, but this is one example of green investments. And it's expensive enterprise, by the way. If you ask people who manage those things in Europe or in other parts of the world, so it's in Europe will be from 1 to 2 million euro just for one such devices. Not thousand, but million for one. And then maintenance and training of professionals. There you go, training of professionals. Jobs are a company. So just you have to service them, you have to produce them, you have to repair them, and you have to replace them. So again, jobs are there. Jobs are there. disagreements in politics over the years about how to approach realism, liberalism, constructivism, conflict theories. They acknowledge the existence of problems, but they, those who support this theory, they acknowledge, but they say that well, the solutions are different, and here's different arguments. Let me review those arguments. That's the goal of my our lecture today. Realism historically was more skeptical toward environmental problems, saying that's just it's not because they don't exist, but the remember it's key assumption of realism: sovereignty and power. Countries have all the tools, all the rights, and all the responsibilities to take care of environmental problems themselves. And there is no power above them to dictate them what they're supposed to do. In theory, that's correct. Right? Yeah, just nobody can tell, say, Madagascar, it's just they must do something. They understand that there are certain problems and they take care of the problems. But in reality, of course, we know that because of the interconnectedness of our problems, realism also understands that certain things cannot be given to separate countries to solve them without international input. And among these issues, I'll mention several of them, like disasters, natural disasters. In case of massive disasters like tsunamis, or earthquakes that involve several countries, and well, rainstorms and dust storms and massive disasters, countries had to coordinate their efforts to help people, to rescue people, to provide food and shelter, to take care of infrastructure that has been damaged. It involves movement of troops and forces and engineers and relocation of people. So it must be some sort of international coordination. So there we go. Not only several sovereign countries, but other countries and international organizations will have responsibility to help, or at least will be asked to help. So realism understands that's important, and this is what they agree this must be developed in the world. Again, tsunamis, earthquakes, and also these natural disasters on a massive scale are sources of social instability, because it's hunger, because it's associated with this, and starvation and pain and diseases, and therefore instability is almost guaranteed. So therefore must be collective actions to prevent the development of disastrous consequences of such events. So environmental security is something that real politics suggests, yes, this is what's supposed to be taken care of, and here international actions are required. Realism also discusses the issue of the importance of less reliance on, say, fossil fuels in particular, because well, fossil fuels unfortunately become source of conflict. In theory, the less we use them, say oil and gas, the less we rely on pipelines and tankers. And yes, from a standpoint of environments, obvious, right? It's just if you no oil tankers, there's no pollution, right? And there's no gas pipelines, there's no leaks and no explosions, and we know, and the forests are preserved, but they are still there, and while they're still there, they can become sources of international conflicts. And this map shows this is most of oil that comes to China comes through the this blue route. It's around Singapore. And definitely any person who thinks strategically can say, it takes a fleet of unfriendly to China power to block the movement of oil and other energy sources from say, Middle East to China. So alternatively, pipelines should be built and through the environmentally sensitive areas, and they're supposed to be protected. So it's military forces there, and then sources of stability. Do we need this? Again, the competition and fighting and protecting pipelines. If countries are more independent and rely on alternative energy sources, there will be less source of conflict. That's a very good point, which realism also accepts. And so think about the possible clashes around the North Pole. But as suggested, I think in the past, that if the oil is available there for extraction, the cost of it will be close to $400 per barrel. So no company will do it just because it's too expensive. But think about it, if your oil is cheap and it's on high demand still, that will be unfortunate clashes right there. So and therefore realism doesn't want to see clashes. Realism, or those professors who think and politicians who think in terms of real politics don't want to see conflicts. So probably it's a phasing out. Eventually fossil fuel will phase out maybe some important source of conflicts. And maybe one of the most compelling arguments that realism embraces its argument about global commons. Countries have the responsibility to maintain and sustain global commons or geographical areas not under any country's sovereign control. And there are so many of those areas. And here, just yes, realist assumption is that we have to have this control. What kind of areas? I give an example of Antarctica. For instance, 1959 treaty prohibits any military activities, nuclear tests, and any economic exploration of the sixth continent. None, nothing. You may not do it. No country might claim a territory in Antarctica. Additional agreements also regulate research, economic, and military activities on the continent. The sort of countries that's in charge, managers, the countries that face Antarctica, Chile, Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, a few others that they're sort of a guardian protectors of those agreements. Tourism is okay there, and research is okay, but they're regulated, and the profits also somehow distributed among those who participate in those enterprises right there in countries. And 1991 Madrid Accord bans coal mining and oil exploration in Antarctica for 50 years. So it will expire in, you can count, in 2041. Will we need then oil exploration and coal and mining? Well, maybe not. And therefore, the accord may not be extended because this will become obsolete, but who knows? But at least now it's a ban. There you go. That's the agreement. That's the agreement, I think, smart agreement, which says don't touch this continent. We damaged a lot of our own homes. Let's not damage this one. And this is, I think, the smart agreement. Smart agreement. And is there any force to protect this? Any fleet there or any guardian protector? No, countries do it collectively and agree using common sense and goodwill. They don't need anybody to police this area. Although, of course, they carefully watch. And I think there are many of those individuals who want to violate these agreements surreptitiously and do something. But of course, it's very difficult to do it without lurking somewhere in the shadows. Liberalism is easy to explain because liberalism is in fact the vehicle behind environmental policies. And it's a concern for environments and concern for our air and our soil and our houses and our conditions in which we live. Historically, it's a matter of liberal thinking, just to be concerned about not only interests of the few, but interests of everybody. Focusing on international treaties and intergovernmental organizations. Promoting awareness, relying on non-government organizations. That's the three pillars on which liberalism is based on. It's a vast area, of course, and specific examples could be discussed in class, but I give you just a couple of examples. One of them is example of, people who are more pragmatic, suggesting that, well, it's okay to promote these ideas of awareness and reliance on treaties and limitations, but we can't replace coal, for instance, because it's now too expensive. And in this slide, I show you data from year 2010. So it's if we substitute coal, then so it will be by nuclear energy, it will be 100% more expensive. Wind 200 and solar will be 500. It's extremely expensive, right? However, contemporary data, and we talk about circa 2020, show that, well, things changed. And the new technologies and the more efficient technologies and the less expensive technologies show that, in fact, it is possible. And something that 20 years ago was completely impossible or non-realistic, 10 years ago, questionable, expensive. Now it's becoming affordable, available, and it's making more sense. The times change, and the policies can be supported by specific action because things indeed change. Awareness. Back in the 70s, I do remember my father just visited Great Lakes area, and I was a kid, and I had no idea about politics and well, wasn't aware much about many things as a kid. But he brought me pictures of Lake Michigan by telling me, that's it. Have you ever seen Dead Sea, son? Well, I've seen the Dead Sea and on the pictures, and it was horrible. And Lake Michigan was a disaster. But due to efforts of individuals, students, well, the retirees and people of middle age, the educated, the uneducated, the concerned, the enlightened, the government officials, and lobbying and litigation, and again legislating issues. It took well, a lot of effort and a lot of years, but today Lake Michigan is unrecognizable compared to 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Unrecognizable. It's what happened there? Just what happened there? Well, it's collective effort. It's a changed mentality of individuals, of those who build new companies and create new companies and buy and sell and produce and employees, but they're different compared to their parents and grandparents 40, 50 years ago. They concerned about things. They have to be concerned. This is their life. This is their lake. So things can change for the better, and this is one of many examples. So public opinion matters. Public opinion plays a key role in strengthening environmental policy in the United States, and this is how many things can be done. Through public opinion, through polls, through litigation, through persuasion, through education. This is what we do. Conflict theories emphasize mostly inequality of among nations, and it's about how much countries consume, how much they produce, how much they pollute, how much they damage, and how much they save. And what was not even a part of concerns, say 60 years ago, 70 years ago, gradually became part of concerns. However, and we talked about a liberal point of view. However, here, those who support conflict theory suggest that still the wealthier nations, wealthier countries and their governments do significantly less in terms of environmental policies that they should have. And those wealthy countries can limit their production, for example, or limit the consumption somehow, or limit distribution of products that's considered to be harmful. But the poorer countries and people of those countries cannot. For instance, United States, we can just in theory, for instance, tomorrow we can talk about its reduction in coal consumption and phase it out within 2, 3, 5 years, just for the sake of example. But close to 1 billion people on Earth use coal just for heating purposes, cooking purposes. That's that many people use daily. So the argument is that it's easy for us, for environmentalists in Fairfax County to say, let's ban this, or let's just stop this, because we can. Other people cannot. You have to invest in them. You have to bring a substitution. They can just bring them something just to burn, if not something to heat their food. Otherwise, just as by simply banning things, we can't survive easily. Yes, we'll be paying more money for things because we cancel one source of energy, but hundreds of millions, if not billions, will not be able to do this. And therefore, more serious policy is supposed to be conducted. This slide shows you, and I designed this to show you the level of consumption of energy in the world. You see United States per person, per capita consumption, and the rest of the world. It is not so to say that, well, we consume so much, almost twice as much as, say, European Union, and maybe 3 times as much as the world in general. Is not to say, okay, now you and I just stop consuming and turn off the lights and that's it. But how can you use this saved energy? So the question is not to stop a consumption, or limits of consumption is one of the goals of many those who work in environmental issues, saying we need to limit our consumption and use of energy. But it's a different story. But the key issue of those who think in the frame of reference of conflict theories, the key issue is how to distribute and redistribute energy without harming everybody, but without harming everybody, but benefiting everybody. So it's being used less in one part of the world, and it will be used more in others, and everybody is happy. Everybody is happy. Of course, I'm using very simple terminology, but very simple things often explain better complicated things that we use in scientific conferences. Again, conflict theories discuss environmental inequality and emphasize the different impact of policies on different countries, and especially the distinction is made between wealthy, we call wealthy North, as you remember, and developing South. It's a key issue, very important issue. It's not just that trivial. And so finally here, this lecture, I will briefly mention constructivism. It's a vast area, of course. Here they discuss environmental policies in the context of values and local context. So suggesting that it's not necessarily policies and only policies and nothing else matters. Human beings are behind those policies, and people bring their values, their perceptions, their ideas. And therefore we must understand these values and must understand the people's mentality to change environmental policies. Examples of environmental values, I'll give example of two type of values, at least 2 type of values and 2 type of discussions today. Cornucopians, so-called cornucopians, in reference to the cornucopia of plenty. Those who believed that natural resources are practically limitless. We have huge planet, we have so much space, we have so much water, we have everything in abundance. The point is to get it and organize things and distribute further, but we have plenty of things. And others would say that's no, this we call neo-Malthusians. No, we follow this of a 19th century British scholar Thomas Malthus, who predicted that the inevitable depletion of natural resources would generate conflicts in the world. So in those who say no, this we just close enough, this close to disaster. Tomorrow, next week, next year, that's it. We need to do something and immediately. Cornucopians, well, are not convinced that that's what's happening. And so these are two type of values. Overall, they are historically connected to 2 type of values that political scientists call mastery values. The opinion or ideas or lifestyle based on assumption that we human beings we are masters of the universe. We control the environment, we control production, and so the nature here for us to exploit and to use. And those who insist on harmony values, they have different attitude, one of preservation and care. And all of us, I believe, we do have a portion of beliefs that's their mastery and portion of beliefs in harmony side, but it's a spectrum, and but still, people, well, we divided between these 2 categories, And political debates, no wonder they continue within this spectrum. And they are about what's the best policy to use to help ourselves, our planet. A couple of very simple examples in conclusion about local context and values. Slash and burn technique farming, it's condemned and criticized almost everywhere in academic world, in the world of politics, big politics in particular. And so it makes sense. What's kind of strange method? You slash and burn, just and it's smoke goes up in the air, and you destroy trees, and this is not very healthy. And yet this method of farming is desperately needed, well, in new farmlands. So desperately needed. It's just this is otherwise you can't grow a crop, you can't harvest anything because you need to get new farmland all the time. But it contributes to deforestation and pollution. Yes, it does. And it's not only one peasant, 10 peasants or 1,000 peasants. No, we talk about millions peasants do it as we speak. And how to solve it? Just stop it, prohibit. It's well, they will die, will starve, they will move, will basically force them to migrate. On the other hand, well, they contribute to pollution. Well, the answer could be, well, but let's give them jobs and educate them and move them to towns. You know the answer to this. Great, of course, let's do it. Let's do it. You have money, you have investment, you have policies, you have will to do this. Of course, maybe will exists, but again, as we say, the devil is always in details. The money, incentive, and lifestyle. And why do you have to force people to change the lifestyle if they've lived there for hundreds of years? I'm just speaking rhetorically, right? So there's arguments of those who are skeptical about these policies. I believe, of course, it's solution is education, re-education, and well, possible employment. So just employ people and provide the conditions for them, and at the same time preserve the environment. But this is difficult to achieve. That's, again, problems exist. We understand we need solutions, but policies is a tough issue. More contemporary example, Poland. Poland accounted for about 40% of Europe coal production today, and they sell it. Poland is importing up to 11, maybe 12 million tons of hard coal. A ton is 1,000 kilograms, and 1 kilogram contains 2.5 pounds, for those of you who are not familiar with metric system. And in Poland, there are tens of thousands of people directly involved in coal mining industries, and hundreds of thousands of family members and those who are near, the nurses, the teachers, the merchants, all the firefighters, you know, this people who live in those towns and villages. If you travel to southern Poland, you know what I'm talking about. And we have a situation here. Labor unions in Poland and public opinion and most political parties, plus the federal government in Poland, they're all against phasing out the coal industry. They say, we would love to phase it out, but give us money. We're part of the European Union. The European Union says, well, not now. We don't have enough. And so we understand that it must be phased out, and you should do it. The question is how. So, yes, employment is solution. Just people get employment, people get education, people get conditions to move out if they want to move out of coal mining regions. But it's a difficult question of time before it will be achieved. But it's achievable. Absolutely, this is achievable. But in the long run, I would like to suggest the last long run, just for our discussion for the future, the slide which suggests that there are difficulties, of course, and every good idea must be supported by smart policy, and smart policy will not harm individuals and promote and help. We can do both. We can do good for in terms of environment, and can do well in terms of human beings, and good and well things can be combined in one policy. So safer investments, safer investments in green industry, definitely the safe. Prevention of economic slowdown by creating jobs, we call green jobs. and support the countries which need that support. Extra taxation of those who are willing to be taxed, or at least will have to be taxed for polluting. So many possibilities, so many options, but these are options for us to discuss in specific classes when we talk about specific policies, and we will do certainly together discuss specific solutions for specific problems, and particularly climate change, a case in point, which is quite interesting. But here we'll stop. We'll remind you that's the chapter on environmental issues. It's very much detailed and with many examples. Next time, we'll turn to human environment, discuss humanitarian issues, which became part of international politics since a long time ago, but we pay more and more attention in the end of 20 and the beginning of 21st century. It's about human dignity, it's about right to live, it's about the right to speak, but right to pray. It's about right to live in the place in which you choose to live and migrate in the place you wanted to migrate. So humanitarian issues will be our next time. I want to remind you that every lecture is accompanied by several questions, practice questions. You can answer them just by watching a video and answer them. And this lecture also contains those questions, and as well as other lectures. Please do this, and it's important for educational purposes, and I hope you're doing this. Thank you so much for your attention, and certainly I'll see you later.